something wrong with my baby. She's not moving.
Okay, how old's your baby?
She's 3 months.
My head, honey.
Okay, well, I don't want you to do anything with the gun. What kind of gun you got?
I got a 22 Colt to my head.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Why don't you just talk to me, and why don't you just lay the gun down? I'm going to talk to you as long as I possibly can until
I cannot lay the gun down. I
Okay.
can't take this back pain.
Okay,
I cannot
Clara.
take this anymore.
Clara, I want you to talk to me, and I don't want you to cock the gun, okay?
The gun is cocked.
Okay, Clara? Somebody okay?
No.
Well, why don't you?
Help. I want to die.
Well,
I want to die.
What's the address? What's the address? What is your address?
Imagine a job where you come to work every day and have to listen to people yelling, screaming, crying, and fighting. Imagine that the phone is ringing and it's a mother calling to say her 3-month-old isn't breathing. Or a child calling, crying, who's hiding in a closet because his daddy is beating his mother. Then while you're on the phone with that child, you hear a gunshot, and then complete silence where there was one yelling and screaming. Then along with the phone calls, imagine a police officer marking on a traffic stop and almost immediately yelling, "Shots fired." You send backup and call the officer on the radio with no response. You call the officer several more times and still no answer. The sound of silence on the other end of the radio is deafening. The first officer arrives on the scene and requests EMS. You advise them that it was started as soon as the incident happened. At this point, you check on the other police units you have on calls, provide updated information to the responding units, and try to make sense out of what happened to the officer who got shot. At the end of your shift, you go home. You don't remember the ride home, walking into your house, or laying down on your bed. You cannot remember all the events of the day, but the sounds of the yelling and screaming and the words "shots fired" are so loud you don't know if you will ever hear quiet again. What kind of job is this? This is the life of a 911 communications officer. The Diagnostic and Statistic Manual for Mental Health Disorders, published by the American Psychiatric Association, specifically stated that being continuously exposed to graphic, traumatic details of events as part of one's job does fall into the definition of trauma, which of course fits for 911 communications officers. These 911 communications officers are entrusted to protect and help everyone that crosses their path, to be sympathetic, empathetic, and resourceful. But who is here for them? They are suffering silently. They feel alone and scared to seek help. Many are afraid that they will never be able to work again after a formal diagnosis.
And how long have you been?
17 years.
17 years. So you started
2001.
2001. Now, with that much experience, do you find that you're struggling at any time leaving your work at work? When you get home, are you still thinking about calls from the day?
Absolutely. It's hard to leave that much stress and not take it home with you and not take it out on family members.
Well, that follows into the next question then. Do you think your job impacts your personal life?
Without a doubt, you're more irritable, less compassionate, sometimes cold toward others because they don't, for the most part, understand what your day consisted of.
Do you find
that with everything that goes on at work, do you find it difficult to leave work at work when you leave?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the stress just stays with you. Sometimes there's the calls that you don't get the closure for.
Right. And when you go home, do the calls that you had that day, are they still with you? Do you still think about them?
Sure.
Okay.
Do you find you struggle with leaving work at work?
Not much anymore. I used to have issues with that, taking stuff home with me and stuff, but not so much anymore.
Is the most frustrating part of your job?
Not knowing the outcome. Not knowing what happened to the 2-year-old abused baby, or not knowing what happened to the officer that just was assaulted. What's going to happen to that person?
Well, we speak of a law enforcement officer being assaulted. With the current climate towards law enforcement, the civil unrest, the protests, riotings, has any of those events impacted you directly or indirectly?
Well, I'm married to a police officer. Not only do I work with them, I've become friends with them, and I'm married to a police officer, so that adds more stress.
Job of a 911 operator, what do you think is the most frustrating part of your job?
I would say not having closure, not knowing how a call ends, or the people that you're trying to help not understanding why you have to ask the questions you have to do, why you have to do what you have to do in order to send them the right people.
Right, just get help now, get them here now.
You're not helping me by yelling.
Right, just, yes, quit asking me all these questions and just get them.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Because I think a lot of people think that there's a delay when we ask those questions. They think that you're not sending help or you're not getting them started.
They don't understand we're already on the way. We just need to provide them with as much information as possible.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned the closure thing. Everybody that we've talked to, that seems to be the one thing that sticks out in everybody's mind, that we deal with so many different things every day and we only deal with it for a short amount of time. Mm-hmm. You know, the cardiac arrest for the pediatric patient, or the vehicle accident where there was multiple injuries. We just never find out how many of that goes.
Yeah.
So now, how do you think that the current law enforcement climate, the civil unrest, the protesting, the rioting, how has that impacted you?
It's definitely leads you to be a little more like open and visual when you're taking calls or talking to people, and you're just kind of like listening for things that may not sound right, because you never know what's going to turn into something awful, right, or going to be the next thing on the news.
Right. Now, Winchester went through a bit of rioting here not too long ago over an incident that happened. Mm-hmm. Now, how was that for you, being as how this is a smaller area, nobody ever thinks it's going to happen here or happen to us?
Yeah, it's definitely scary. You worry about your town, you worry about your officers.
Right.
And people just don't understand.
Right. Now, did you guys get even more of an influx of calls because of the rioting, or was that in addition to the normal busyness that was going on?
I would say we got a little bit more. Some people were just concerned with what we were going to do, if it was true. And I think most of the talking that took place on Facebook. People were on our page commenting and this and that.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
If you had one message to society about the job that you do, what would that message be?
We're not just secretaries. We don't just sit there and answer the phone. There's other stuff that we deal with. There's other emergencies that we deal with. There's things that we hear that we can't get out of our heads. The mom who finds the 2-year-old hanging from the blinds, you can't take her screams away.
One message to society about the job that we do and about the stress that we endure, what would that be?
That we're really here to help you. You may think that all these questions we're asking you and all this stuff is pointless to you. You just want them there, but we can't send you the right help if you don't answer our questions and help us out.
Right. And what do you want them in that, speaking of asking the questions, what do you want them to know about you and about the job that you're doing?
That we're just here to help. I mean, we're required to ask these questions. Right. And your safety and our officers' safety and our EMS and fire professionals, it's their safety too.
Communications officer, how do you deal with that moment when you're not sure how your person is, how your law enforcement officer is here, or if one of those alarms is going off on a firefighter and you're trying to confirm or deny? How do you deal with that not knowing until you hear?
Well, basically the way I deal with it is, you do your job. If you do your job, that's going to take your head out of it. That's going to take your emotions out of it. If you're constantly doing your job, you're not going to be worried about being scared, being worried, being crying, or anything like that. It's going to focus on what you're supposed to be doing if you do your job. There's plenty of time for that after this. It's over with.
Well, it's going to bring up a tough question. In 1999,
yes,
something like that happened, and the outcome was the worst possible news we could get.
Yes.
You were on the radio that night.
Yes.
Tell me.
The incident happened. They were looking for a probation violator. On the radio, said that he said that there was a black man wearing a jumpsuit with a flag standing in the shadows. I was trying to avoid him, and he was going to go and check him and ID him before they left. Ricky marked a foot pursuit with him. They chased him down, and then next thing he heard, which was the other officer the other person who was with Ricky, I didn't know at the time, started screaming shots fired, shots fired, shots fired on the radio. Shots fired, shots fired. Then where I said, "Temporary copy, shots fired. 300 block East Piccadilly Street, Winchester 31. Winchester 3rd." And he never answered me. And they were the first ones to Ricky. And the one officer told me, he said, you know, officer down, send fire rescue. And I said, well, you can tell me I copy officer down. They said he was shot in the head. And that was, they transported Ricky. I remember I called the helicopter from Fairfax to look for the suspect. So that was, I can remember when it happened, when it all started, when it all went down. And they always talk about the fight or flight syndrome when your adrenaline gets up like that. And I can remember looking at the top of my computer screen when I heard the officer, when I heard the pursuit and the shots fired. I remember I was looking at the top of my head screen, just top of the screen. I remember looking at that thinking, I gotta get out of here. I can't do this. I gotta go. But there wasn't any time for that. So you grabbed.
But how afterwards were you able to deal with that? Were you able to look at the positive that this person didn't get away with taking your friend from you and
Right.
killing a law enforcement officer in cold blood?
Not right off. That took a while. First of all, I blame myself because, you know, I mean, I blame myself in the fact that it happened, that I let it happen by myself. And I went home at the house, and I remember just thinking about it over and over again, every second of everything that I had done. And I realized, I mean, it had a crappy outcome. And with Ricky dying, it was a horrible thing you could imagine. But I came to realize through counseling and stuff that, you know, sometimes you do everything right and bad things still happen.
Bad things happen to good people.
Right, exactly, and that's what it was. Everything.
Do you believe that a 911 communications officer can develop PTSD as a result of the job they do?
Yes.
What's the moment in your career you realize the depth of responsibility and personal involvement that takes place with your job?
12 years ago, we had a guy that blew up his house in an attempt to commit suicide, and I still have nightmares 12 years later about once a week.
At what point did you realize the depth of the responsibility and your personal involvement in this job?
I would say probably when I was still training with you, actually, and you had that infant cardiac arrest. I mean, that was serious for me. That was like, wow, this is the big leagues. That's somebody's worst nightmare.
Right.
And
This may go back to the call you just spoke of, but describe an incident that after it was over, you almost didn't come back to work.
When I was 6 months in, I wasn't even fully cleared yet. I had a guy call and say he just shot his girlfriend, and you can hear the child screaming in the background. I was way too new and didn't think I could stick with it after that call.
And now?
17 years later, I'm still here.
Tell me briefly about a time that you had a day here at work and just things did not go your way. It might have been one call, it might have been a compilation of calls. Was there ever a day that you almost didn't come back?
I don't know. I don't remember. Like, I'm such a person that doesn't want to give up, so I always try to come back from it. But I would say I was out of training. I would say when the bank was robbed on Berryville Avenue and the officers got shot at by that guy, like, that was pretty traumatizing for me, for sure. Especially when one of them was like one of my close friends.
Right. I was going to say one of them was a very good friend of yours.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that
absolutely.
was pretty scary for me,
Yeah.
for sure.
That was one of those, the depth and the responsibility and your
Yes.
personal involvement kind of sink in
Yes.
with you. Okay.
One of the hardest things 911 communications officers often deal with, and you spoke of recently, is not having that closure to certain events or incidents. Why do you think it's so difficult for folks like you when it comes to that?
Because you just never know the end of the story. You want the child to make it, but you don't know if the 2-month-old that you were given CPR instructions over the phone, if they made it. You don't know if the 911 call you got about the shaken baby and last you heard the child was on life support, and you don't know if they make it. It's tough not knowing what happens.
Would it be tougher knowing what happens if it's a negative result?
Sometimes.
So it's just a matter of wanting to know were you able to help get them help in
Right.
time?
Right.
One of the hardest things 911 communications officers often deal with, like we talked about before, was closure. Why do you think it's so difficult after you've taken those calls? You know, you've been doing this for 13 years. We all know that closure is not something that is going to happen. Why is it so difficult to continue to struggle with it and to deal with not being able to find out what happens?
I think sometimes, especially when you have like a cardiac arrest, it's like you feel like, okay, if I would have did it a little faster, would I have made a difference? If it was at 911 hang up, you called 10 times and you got them on the, and if you would have called them back a little bit faster, would you have saved their life? Like that kind of stuff.
Right. So it's just the second guessing.
Yes.
Second
and
guessing.
could you did it better?
Right. Exactly. Now, do you think that that's something that in our profession we do a lot of?
Yes, definitely.
Do you feel your employer does enough to offer stress management services to you? What would you like to see done to help take care of you and your coworkers when struggling with these type of situations?
More debriefings. Also, sometimes debriefings are optional. I think they should be mandatory.
Do you find, or would you think, that if something were made mandatory and someone were forced to attend, are we going to get through to that person? Are they really going to be receptive? And I understand where you're coming from, but if someone's telling me, maybe not a mandatory debriefing, but a once a quarter having to attend some type of one-on-one session with a professional.
Anything would help.
Very vital. Do you feel that your employer does enough to help you manage the stress and deal with the situations that you have to deal with? Is your employer supportive of you, or could they do more?
I think they could probably do more.
What do you think that, in your eyes and in your opinion, would be more?
I would just say, like, personal time, like one on like them, your higher ups making more contact with you, checking on you. I mean, I know like we have a peer-to-peer team, but sometimes it's nice to know that your supervisor is worried about you, wants to make sure you're okay.
So a matter of closure, you think?
Yeah, yeah.
You've hung up the phone,
And
help's on the way, but
you don't know what happens because the phone rings and you take the next call. And unless that deputy or fire and rescue calls in to tell you what happens, or if you reach out to that person, you don't know. You just move on to the next one.
and that's not, you dread going to work?
Every Sunday. I normally work Monday through Friday. Every Sunday I'll have a headache. I've gotten to the point where I break out in hives because of stress.
But do you feel that the stress for a 911 communications officer is a real thing?
Very much so.
Because we have members of our profession, like you said, that sit back and go, what do they have to be stressed about? And that's why I feel, let's set you in there. So now that you're on patrol, how important do you feel the 911 communication officers are to you while you're out there on the street?
100% I rely on them. They're our lifeline, and that's something that sitting on the other side of the radio to where I'm at now. When I key that mic up, I want someone to know that I want to know that someone's there and that they're going to help. There's a lot more that goes on behind the radio than what the average officer who's never sat in dispatch or has only spent a day because they're
Or a few
field
hours.
training. Yeah, because their field training requires them.
Is there a time you can remember when a 911 communications officer's efforts made a difference in the outcome of a call you were on?
There's so many. That's trying to narrow it down to one. I've had difficulty doing that.
But the answer is yes.
The answer is yes. I mean, it's every single time. I mean, they're my people. I mean, without them, you wouldn't have us, and without us, you wouldn't have them.
Good for society to let them know what the real job is like.
These dispatchers are human. They can only do so much at one time, and they are doing everything. They're not just down here sitting on their hands or ignoring the phone.
Currently, there are organizations in place that assist fire and rescue and law enforcement personnel alike when they're dealing with stress from PTSD. Why do you think currently no organization is specific to 911 dispatch professionals?
I think that people just don't understand or realize what we do. Some people think we just sit there and answer the phone all day or talk on the radio all day, and there's so much more to it than just that.
There's so many organizations out there now. There's one that just opened up in Maryland for firefighters, and I believe in Prince George's County, helping deal with stress, PTSD. There's organizations to help police officers deal with the stress and deal with things that they're going through. Why do you think nobody's ever opened up or offered or come up with an idea to offer 911 operators?
Because we're unseen. They think because we don't visually see it, that doesn't affect
About
us.
that call that they just gave out. I know we have organizations for law enforcement, for fire and rescue, hotlines and such, you know, to help. Do you think it's why do we not have an organization yet? We have helplines for police officers, we have helplines for firefighters, EMTs. Why do you think there isn't one yet for communications officers?
Because I think there is a misconception out there still of what they do.
I think it's
You and I go
possible
to
that an emergency communications officer can suffer from PTSD.
Yeah, it's very possible, yes. And I think there's a lot more of them suffering from it than what they realize. Because it takes a while. I mean, it's not something immediate. It takes a while.
Why do you think we don't have an organization specific to them to help them?
Maybe because it's complicated. Although communications officer has been around for a long time, I think it's just it's a tough field. It's a tough position to try to, you know, because the outside world sees them as you're taking calls.
You're answering the phone. You're a receptionist.
Yeah, but you're going back to that administrative duty. You're talking to people that have just seen their family killed, or heard that their family killed, or walked in and had their family killed, and you're hearing that in their voice. It's just complicated. I think it's just tough to try to come up with something like that. And I don't have the answer for. I mean, even doing it for 6 years and still watching my dispatchers, I don't have an answer. It's just complicated.
or ignoring the phones. I wish, you talk about these shows, Live PD, great show, because it enables people to see.
Not just the excitement.
Right. They're like, God, they've got jerks in that town too. Every town has their idiot.
We're talking with Sheriff Lenny Milholland now, the Sheriff of Frederick County. Do you consider a 911 communications officer a true first responder?
I have always through my career thought that if it wouldn't be for dispatchers, there's a whole lot of our life that would be a whole lot different, because they take care of us first. They know what it's like from the caller, and then they relay that to us. So yes, I think they are first responders.
Our four walls. What would the message be about the job of a 911 communications officer?
You would never know the amount of calls and the stress that these people go through, because if you have a situation where somebody, say, calls in and says they're going to commit suicide, or if there's an accident and there's a child involved, or if there's a rollover and someone calls and needs a quick response, that dispatcher is going to be the first line of defense. They're going to tell us what it is, where we're responding to, and just that amount of stress the average person doesn't know. It's hard to say come to Frederick County Sheriff's Office or go to our dispatch and listen to how they do, because we don't invite the public in there. But the fact is, those phones ring constantly, day in and day out, 24 hours a day, and these are your first line of defense. As far as my agency, the Sheriff's Office, if my people respond something that appears, if it involves children or a death or a suicide or something like that, we offer them, some sort of support. We tell them they can go see, the agency psychologist and talk to them, or, whatever EAP that we have, just to try to assist them, because it's a difficult job, and society doesn't know how hard it is to watch a child die. And once you see that, you don't want to be the dispatcher knowing at the other end, when that officer gets there, that's what they're going to find. So, it's a stress-related situation for the dispatcher, for the law enforcement officer, and for the parents or the guardian, whoever's with the child or whatever person were responded to.
Dean, do you believe agencies are doing enough to ensure that our 911 communication personnel are getting the help they need? Is there something else that can be done, or are we just applying a Band-Aid?
Well, you have to look at the overall picture. A lot of it boils down to the amount of funding that whatever jurisdiction has, whatever dispatch, communication center, whatever county, whatever city that you have, to other sheriffs and other chiefs, and as you said, the superintendent of the state police. We all know what's going on. We all see it. But it all boils down to funding. And unfortunately, dispatch or communications and law enforcement are the last one on that list.
As the old guard is moving out, the new guard's moving in, just like with law enforcement, what would you want to express to new dispatchers in regards to the stress that this job can create?
It's okay to be human. It's okay for something that people know. You are your brother's keeper, but you touched on it earlier. I don't want to offend them. Damn it, offend them.
You're not a machine.
Exactly. You're human. You have a heart. You're allowed to feel things. We all are. I don't care what public thinks, what their perception of us is. And when I say of us, I mean...
The stress isn't affecting your job performance.
No, because you have to put it aside. It's not about me. It's about those guys on the other end of the radio who you make sure go home.
So you're able to put it aside to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
To hear you on the radio, professional, concise, calm, under pressure, you would never know the stressors that are taking place that we've talked about here today. So you're able to take that stress, put it away for a moment, and get the job done. Do you think there's a way, after the job is done, to revisit that stress, address it, deal with it, and then throw it away completely?
There is. I'd like to find it. It's easier said than done.
Anybody that truly spends any time with you, known you twice, to be in anything that I would consider other than how can we get them in that mindset where you seem to be?
I can only say that I've had a whole lot of things happen to me in life, and there are so many times in my life where I could have probably been a statistic, and by virtue of good luck, the good Lord, or my dispatchers, I'm still here. So
if you can relate to this information or share some of the same feelings as the people in this video, get help. Don't be afraid or feel as though others will perceive you as being weak. This is one of the most difficult and stressful jobs. It is also one of the most rewarding and satisfying jobs that you will ever have the chance of doing. Not everyone can do this job. I truly believe it takes a special person to be able to continuously go to the worst extreme with people and offer them the help to get back. To have the opportunity to provide CPR instructions to someone and hear that first breath. To stay on the line with a female who is scared after a physical confrontation with her boyfriend. To answer 911 and be able to calm the fears of a child knowing you can relate because you have a child of your own that age. To know that when the officer asked for help, you quickly got him what he needed without hesitation. To recognize something not quite right in an officer's tone of voice on the radio and to be able to react. To be able to send those men and women home every night to their families. To be able to tell someone it's going to be okay and that you will help them through is one of the most humbling and satisfying experiences I've ever had the pleasure of knowing. But none of this comes without consequence. And being able to process these things and come out on the other side complete and intact is the goal. And I hope that if you are struggling with something or have a hard time coping with a particular incident, that you do seek help. If you notice a coworker who seems off or just not like themselves, say something. We are all a family, and remember, in this family, no one fights alone.